Thank you, David. Well, it's a real pleasure for me to be here, and I'd like to thank the board for this invitation. My degrees and my advanced degrees are in education. Basically, I'm a teacher. But through some tenacity and a little bit of luck, I've been able to be in some pretty extraordinary situations, and a few years ago wrote a rather obscure article that Farms picked up on and published. And that's referenced in your program there, and the board has asked me to speak on that today. And rather than going through and rereading the article, I'm going to take you through a discovery process. I'm going to take you through a short tour of the Museum of Anthropology, just one small part, and let you discover with me how we made a connection between some seemingly unrelated things to the Mesoamerican, the Mesoamerican custom of smiting off arms to this story that we have in the Book of Mormon. Now go ahead and hit that first slide there. We've talked a little bit today about what is Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica basically starts in up north and kind of the middle, well, the mountains of Mexico, and then goes down into El Salvador and Guatemala and a little bit of Honduras and Belize. That's Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica means Middle America. Now what happens a lot is we as eager Latter-day Saints or friends of Latter-day Saints, we decide we want to go to Mesoamerica and we want to find the Book of Mormon in Mesoamerica. Go ahead with the slide. And it's hard to find. When I first went to Mesoamerica as a student many years ago, I had seen Ancient America Speaks. I'd seen Chichen Itza on the film. I went to Mesoamerica and it sort of hit me. What I was seeing in Mesoamerica had very little to do with, in relation to time, of the Book of Mormon. And I became a little bit cynical about what I was looking at. Little did I know that I would return to Mesoamerica and live for 10 years and work there for 10 years. And that healthy cynicism turned into a different look. Rather than going to Mesoamerica and finding the Book of Mormon, we want to find the Book of Mormon, or I'm sorry, we want to find Mesoamerica inside the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is full of Mesoamerica. And the more we learn about Mesoamerica, the more we can find Mesoamerica inside the Book of Mormon. And this gets very, very exciting. Now, I have a bias here. My bias is the best place that you can learn about the Book of Mormon in Mesoamerica, or Mesoamerica in the Book of Mormon, is at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. Now, if you get the opportunity to travel throughout Mesoamerica, go to the great sites, some of which we've talked about today, take it. But my bias is right here in Mexico City, if you can spend hours and hours there, you will find evidences of Mesoamerica that you can relate to the Book of Mormon. And I had the opportunity in my 10 years there to take many courses at night in this museum from the curators of the museum and from professors at the National University who would come and tell us the Mesoamerican story. And later, when I gave tours of this museum, dozens, maybe even up to 100 tours of this museum, if we were giving a Book of Mormon tour or if we were giving a tour to a non-LDS group, it was the same story. We didn't change the story at all, other than with the book of, those interested in the Book of Mormon, we would make reference to what they would be seeing there. When you first go to the museum, you're introduced to what was considered the mother culture of Mesoamerica. Those are the Olmecs. Those are the people with the big heads that we just saw right now. Following the Olmecs, the next major culture were the Teotihuacanos. I guess a symbol of them, the Olmecs would be your pre-classic, your Teotihuacanos would be your classic. Their symbol would be the Great Pyramids outside of Mexico City. That was that great civilization. And this is going to be important to our story a little bit later. Following the Teotihuacanos are the Toltecs. Their icons, I suppose, you would consider Tula, which there's some ruins north of Mexico City, and Chichen Itza in the middle of the Mayan world. And they were the ones that probably took human sacrifice that already existed to new heights, so to speak. Following the Toltecs were the Aztecs, or more commonly referred to now as the Mexica. And following them was the Spanish colonial. Now the Mayan existed during this entire time, but they followed some of the same patterns of Mesoamerica. Now Mesoamerica is tied together by culture. For example, the ball game or pantheon of gods, the jaguar that we learned about, their religion, the idea of calendars and numbers. And it has well, we'll jump over there. Here's the relationship that the Nephites have to those cultures right there, and some approximate dates on the side. Mesoamerica, per se, even though people existed before and after, really spans about a 3,000-year history. That's tied together by these cultural tendencies that pass from the Olmec all the way to the Aztec or the Mexica. Go ahead. Thank you. Mesoamerica, you've seen the map several times today. Mesoamerica is Middle America. Mesoamerica refers to, you've got the Sierra Madre Mountains in Mexico, kind of makes a U-shaped, and then comes down through what's now Mexico City, goes through the narrow neck of land, then covers the Yucatan Peninsula, Chiapas, Guatemala, inches down into El Salvador, some of Honduras. That's Mesoamerica. And that's what scholars believe would be the primary location for much of what is the Book of Mormon now. And Mesoamerica is tied together by these cultural tendencies of religion, sports, building, architecture, calendar, language, things like that. And even though it spans all these different people, they generally, with some territorial kind of things, cover the same places over from about 1500 BC to about 1500 AD. Now the Olmecs, arguably you can take before that time, and the Mayans go down, and ironically the Nephites, who come around 600 BC, that's about the same time the Mayan really take off as a culture, even though they exist before as people. So we're going to make a comparison today, and we're going to show you how we're going to do this with some validity between something that happened in the Aztec time and something that happened in the Nephite time, even though those two times are very distant. But they're within both of those groups, if they're both within Mesoamerica, are going to have some common cultural tendencies. Even though they may evolve and change between the time the Nephites were there and the time that the Aztecs were there. Go ahead. We're going to begin our journey today in the Mexica room in this museum. Now, the Museum of Anthropology is arguably one of the best museums in the world. They built it in 1964. You walk in to there's a great courtyard. We're actually standing, just coming inside from the courtyard at the far end of the museum. The courtyard is built in the dimensions of Uxmal, the great Mayan city in the Yucatan. So the museum itself is symbolic. And when the architects built the museum, they toured museums all over the world, whether it was the Louvre in France or even our museums here in the United States. And they decided to build a museum where you'd walk in a room, and then to go to the next section, you'd have to actually walk out into the courtyard, rest your mind a little bit, breathe in that smog, that air, and go in and do it again. And it's just a wonderful museum. But the architects of the museum, down at the end of the museum, they put what they considered the most important culture to the Mexicans, the Mexica, where we get the word Mexico or Mexico from. And if you walk into a Catholic church, which many of you have done all over the world, down at the end is the altar, and it gives you sort of this aha feeling, like, wow. And that's what happens when you walk into the Mexica room, with the altar down at the end being the great calendar stone. Inside this museum, we're introduced to the Boturini Codex. And it tells, it's about 20 pages long, and it's spread out. It's, for some reason, ripped off at the end. We don't know what happened to the other end of it. But it talks about this journey that the Mexica had from the north. And they bring with them one god at the time, this guy right here. And he's Hitzilopochtli. He's the great war god of the Aztecs, or the Mexica. And they leave the city, the country of Aztlan, somewhere in the north, around the year 1100. They speak Nahuatl, which is interestingly related to the same language as the Utah Nevada Indians. Now, archaeologists and anthropologists do not believe that they began that far north, but that's just a little interesting thing. If that ever shows up on Trivial Pursuit, you've got the answer there. But Nahuatl brings us great words even into English, like chocolate for chocolate, aguacate for avocado, tomato, tomate. You kind of get, they call grass in Mexico zacate. They call corn elote. So you kind of get the pattern from this Nahuatl language. But they come down from the north with basically 4 tribes. As they're coming down from the north, we learn today that they stop in Tula for a while. Now, these are nomadic people. They're dirty people. Some even refer to them as chichimeca, the dog people. They're not the kind of people that you want as your neighbors, and that's why the people of Tula wanted them to just sort of keep going southward. But as they're descending into Mesoamerica, they're learning what it's like to be a Mesoamerican. They're learning about pyramids, structures, architecture. They're learning about gods. They're learning about the religion. And their war god, Huitzilopochtli, as he grows in power through their time in Mesoamerica, begins to take upon himself many of the attributes of the other Mesoamerican gods, so that later, when the Spanish gets there, Huitzilopochtli is just about everybody. Anyway, they come from the north, they stop in Tula, and they meet the Toltecs. They even adopt the Toltecs as their grandparents, their mother culture, which may not be unreasonable, considering the Toltecs also came from the north a few hundred years before. As they come down into this valley here, this is now Mexico City, right here. And this is the Zocalo, right downtown. There are about, some estimates are about 300,000 people already living there at the time that the Mexica get down there. Anyway, there's a few stories. We won't go into any of them. One of them was about the snakes that was referred to today. But they end up on this island in the middle of a lake where nobody else wanted that rock. And within a short amount of time, they've learned to build chinampas from the people of Xochimilco, and they're growing their tomates, their elotes, their aguacates, their chiles. And if you can grow food, you can gain some economic power. They were also mercenaries and became very powerful, to the point that they could intermarry and intermingle with the other tribes and eventually take them over. Now, go ahead. In our history books, we learn about the Mexican flag, and having been a school teacher and a principal in Mexico City, we teach the kids that the way it happened is they showed up and there was an eagle standing on a nopal cactus, standing on a rock with a snake in its mouth. And that's how the Aztecs knew where to stop. Well, we'll just tell you that it didn't quite happen that way. This is what's called the Codex Mendoza. This was written in very early colonial times, commissioned by the politicians of the time. And so the Aztec, the Mexica scribes wrote this codex. And I've just taken a picture of the center of it. This is the center of their world right here, which would be the center of Mexico City or Tenochtitlan. And you have your 4 quadrants and 4 major canals going through the city right there. And here we have our eagle standing on a cactus over a rock, and this fruit right here. I forgot to tell you, this isn't a very edifying presentation. You'll begin to see why, and it's not going to be for the faint of heart. No pun intended. Don't change it yet. Go on back. This rock right here, and this symbol through the rock, stands for the human heart, right there. It's a glyphic symbol, so to speak. The prickly pears right there also represent the human heart. And I don't know where the snake went, but this was an original Mexica symbol. And you can begin to see other signs of human sacrifice in this right here. I don't know what that foot is tied to that guy for right there. Go ahead. Now, just keep that in thought, because we're going to be putting some things together here. We're going to jump to, I don't know, this is about around 600 AD to the Mayan world. All right, we're 600-700 years after, the Mexica are 600 or 700 years after this rock right here, which is at the Temple of the Cross in Palenque. But I want to show you something. Go ahead with the next one. We're going to make it a little easier to see right here. Okay, go ahead with the next one. On the top here we have a bird. And you can see his talons right there. One of his legs is up like that. His tail and his beak right there. Okay, go to the next one. In this green figure we have a cross, which could also be another presentation, but depending from Popol Vuh, this could be a corn plant, but also sometimes it's representative of the ceiba tree, the Mayan tree of life, right there. So now we have a bird standing on top of the Mayan tree of life. Let's go to the next one. And down here we have an earth god, and some of the Mayan ruins in the Yucatan are actually built in this shape, and you can walk right in the teeth and walk right down into the underworld through the earth god. Go ahead. So basically the point of this is the Mexica borrowed from the Toltecs, who borrowed from the Teotihuacanos, who borrowed from the Olmecs, and the Mayan were there the whole time. And what's now on the Mexican flag is ancient Mesoamerican symbol that was long before the Mexica ever showed up. Maybe to up the price a little bit for the auction, if you go out there, there's a leather imprint of the tomb of Pakal, and coming out of Pakal's chest is this symbol right there. You can go see it. It's all over Mesoamerica, and the Mayans still honor that symbol in Chiapas today. But the point is that cultures borrowed from each other. And even though the legend is that what we do with the kids is the Aztecs stopped where they found that eagle, it's not the way it happened. Go ahead. When the Spanish came from Veracruz, they came up here between Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. And Popocatépetl at the time was active. And they came over here and they looked down on Tenochtitlan, and they said it was the most beautiful city that they had ever seen. It was like a jewel glistening in the lake. And as they got into the city, they said it was the cleanest, most organized city. I mean, they had come from Europe, where we're still throwing human waste out the window and spreading the plague around. And here in Mesoamerica, we have toilets. I know because I've seen them with my archaeologist friends saying, come and look before we bury them again. We've got running water. And in most places, especially in these kinds of areas right there. Go ahead. They were introduced to the center of the city, and this is in the Museum of Anthropology, to the great temple, the twin temple here in the center of the city. This one on our left is the temple to Tlaloc, the rain god, and on the right here is to Huitzilopochtli, the war god. Now, Cortez thought that they were doing 2,000 to 3,000 human sacrifices a year here. Some of the modern numbers that we're looking at are about 250,000 human sacrifices a year here. Bernal Diaz de Castillo, going through one town on their trek over, counted 100,000 skulls, human heads, in the center of one town. They've excavated that, and they've only found 300, so to speak. But what we do know is there were hundreds of sacrifices, human sacrifices, on this temple in a year. Some say that those sacrifices were daily. Some say that there were 18 festivals in which they did hundreds. But we know from evidence around that this was a big part of Mesoamerican religion. And again, the Toltecs and the Mexica took it to a level that Mesoamerica probably had not seen before. Okay, we're going to hold that thought for a moment. This is from the Florentine Codex. And here we see evidence of battle and warriors and decapitation and the cutting off of arms right there. But we want to talk about, go ahead and hit the next one, we want to talk about this word right there. Now there's a lot of ways to mispronounce that word. My choice of mispronunciation is Mecoatli. But there are other people will say that. This is a Mecoatli sword right here. This is a Mesoamerican sword, and we see evidence of it all over Mesoamerica, rather, if not from the obsidian pieces, from drawings themselves done during the early colonial times. The way a Mecoatli sword is really a wonderful weapon if you need a weapon. When the Spanish came in and were fighting against these swords, they said that, Bernal Diaz de Castillo writes that these obsidian points here held their fine edge much better than the Spanish metal swords. And obsidian is abundant in Mesoamerica. You can pick it up almost everywhere, every site you go to, you can pick up little shards of it and things like that. But when obsidian hits with metal, the obsidian shatters. In giving one of my tours, one of the medical doctors pointed out to me that before the invention of high quality plastics that we have now, obsidian was used in neurosurgery because they were much more accurate in using obsidian knives than they were with high alloy steel kinds of knives. Now this sword right here has a flat side and it has an edge side, and the Mayan Mesoamerican sword would also have a piece of obsidian on the point right there. Bernal Diaz de Castillo was a soldier who was with Cortez, and he writes a story called, he writes a history called the True Conquest of Mexico, as opposed to Cortez's conquest, I suppose. And he calls them two-handed swords, or in other words, the Spanish were referring to these as broadswords. And they were quite skilled with them. In Tlaxcala, before coming over those mountains into Mexico City, the Spanish had a pretty terrible battle with the Tlaxcalans. And when you read Bernal Diaz de Castillo's book, the Tlaxcalans gave up just before the Spanish had been conquered. And that was the story of the Spanish conquest. The Mesoamericans just seemed to give up right before they could have or should have. But in that battle, one of the Tlaxcalan warriors takes one of these swords And Bernal Diaz de Castillo explains, with the swing of the sword cuts through a horse's head completely, except for the skin on the other side. That's how sharp these swords are, and the Spanish knew that and knew to stay away from them. I'm reading a book right now called Flyboys about World War II, and it has some pretty interesting and some pretty sad stories of Japanese American atrocities in World War II, and especially the Japanese in China, and the idea of severing off heads. And it was something that the Chinese or the Japanese had to position themselves for. It's not something that just happens in battle. Yet here we have a Mesoamerican warrior in battle with a big Macatle sword that can slice through a horse's head. That's how sharp these are with these heavy broadswords, so to speak. Let's go ahead. We're back to the temple now. Got that little bit of information. We're now looking at this little yellow section right here, and there's a stone in that yellow section right there that weighs about 27 metric tons. Okay, it's if it were to stand up, it would probably go from floor to ceiling right here. That gives you a little bit of perspective. That stone was rediscovered in 1979 when Lucy Fuerza, Light and Electricity of Mexico, were trying to dig down to do some work, and they hit a rock, and they couldn't get through the rock. So they dug down, and they found one of the most significant finds in Mexico City in the last century, of the 1900s. And so they called Dr. Solis. He's the one who's telling us this story in the museum, and he goes down, and he's ecstatic at what they found, because that stone is at the base of the most important Mexica temple, which they had thought was under the cathedral, but was actually next door. So they clear off the colonial building, and rising 16 feet out of the ground are the remnants of these two temples. Now, why does it rise out of the ground? Mexico City is built on a lake, and it's hydrodynamics. If you take a sponge and you put a heavy rock on it, the sponge goes down. You take the heavy rock off, the sponge goes up. You put a colonial building on Mexico City, and for those of you who've been there, everything is sinking. You take the colonial building off, and stuff comes back up. And so you're now looking up at these pyramids now, or what's left of them. Go ahead. This is the stone that was found there. This lady here is Coyolxauhqui. She is the moon goddess of Mesoamerica, and she's one of the protagonists in our story that we're going to tell here. Now, Coyolxauhqui here is dismembered. Her arms are cut off, and her legs are cut off, right here. And she's lying at the bottom of the pyramid of Hitzilopochtli, or the temple to Hitzilopochtli. Let's go ahead. Now we're going to jump to understand the culture a little bit more to the Tlatelolco market. When the Spanish saw this market, they had never seen anything like it in the world, and they had seen markets around the world. It was enormous. It was massive. It was clean. They could find anything there, and a variety of things from all over Mesoamerica. People traveled and traded and things like that. But I want to take an even closer look at it and point out a few things that will help in our story. Women who were childbearing or married had their head up in braids, in two braids like this. Women who were not childbearing yet or not married had long hair like this. Some people were very, very wealthy and wore fine clothing made out of cotton with sandals. Here we have a gentleman with sandals on, meaning that he's probably of a nobler class than the others. Others would be barefoot, and the cloth that their clothing was made from came from the maguey cactus. It's a fine cloth. What is it that we make in the United States made out of plant? The name escapes me. No, not hemp. Flax? Is that what you said, flax? Yeah. It's a good cloth, but if you're noble, You get to wear sandals. You get to wear cotton clothing. If you're not, you go barefoot, and you make your clothing out of the fiber from the maguey cactus. There's this distinction in what you can wear and how you can dress and how you can interact with people and what parties you can go to. And in other words, if you're born a canoe maker, you're probably going to die a canoe maker. If you're born a pottery maker, you're going to die a pottery maker. In the Aztec world, if you're born into nobility, you'll be taught certain skills and maybe how to read and write that the others will not be taught. And you get to go to all the right parties and hobnob with the right people. We'll keep that in our minds for a moment. Go ahead. Now, this is the calendar stone, so to speak. Go ahead and hit the next button. We're going to make it a little easier to look at right here. This is to the sun god, Tonina, but Huitzilopochtli, the war god, has now incorporated Tonina's characteristics, also incorporated Quetzalcoatl's characteristics. And so when the sun god speaks, it's as if Huitzilopochtli speaking, the main god, the war god that the Mexica brought with them. The reason this is called a calendar stone is because we've got these 20 calendar glyph days going around it. It's not a calendar like, hey, what day is today? But they've got sacrificial knife day represented here. They've got earthquake day. They've got monkey day or alligator day, things like that. But what this calendar stone is really doing is telling us their creation story. And their creation story goes something like this. Here I am, the sun god, even the war god, and sticking out of my mouth is a sacrificial knife, as a tongue with an eyeball looking at you. And I'm saying, you need to feed me, or I'm going to destroy you. Inside my claws here are human hearts, with eyeballs looking out at you from the claws as well. I mean, this is kind of an intimidating guy to have for your God. And so he's saying, because and this is what Quetzalcoatl did, because I went down underneath the temple of the sun and gathered the bones of man and bled over them so that you could live again, you now owe me. And he tells, in our Judeo-Christian scriptures, we have really two creations of man. We have Adam and Eve, and then we have Noah starting over again. Well, the gods created man. He didn't work out, so they sent wild beasts to devour him, and we've got some wild beasts on the earth now. They created man again, and the alligator here represents a great wind. And some of the men were able to turn themselves into monkeys, so to speak. And we've got monkeys now. They created man again, and this time they sent a rain of fire to destroy man. Now, what would cause a rain of fire? They had Popocatépetl, the active volcano, right in their backyard. And every time that thing spit and spattered, imagine what happened to the human sacrifice ratio. And then man was destroyed by a flood. Some of the men were able to turn themselves into fish. We now live within the fifth and final creation of time. And in this glyph symbol is this sort of this X that goes around, kind of an X on steroids, so to speak. And it's the same symbol that you have right there, right up there, kind of this puffy X. It says, I'm going to destroy you a fifth and final time with a movement of earth, an earthquake. And so imagine what happened every time Mexico City shook. What would happen to the human sacrifice ratio? Go ahead. Now we're going to meet another protagonist in our story, Coatlicue, serpent skirt. And I don't know how much she weighs, but she's bigger than both of these stones. She would stand here from floor to ceiling, much wider than I could spread my arm. She's in the Museum of Anthropology, and this is basically the goddess of all, Mother Earth. Up on top here we have two snakes looking at each other, or their eyeballs are looking out at you. And she's dressed to kill, so to speak. On her shoulder pads are two snakes looking out at you. She has 4 hands, 2 sets of hands right here with human hearts covering her breast right there. On her belt buckle is a human skull, and just to be, because it's a formal, or she really wants to look her best, she's got snakes around her skirt. She's got human hearts dangling from her her underdress right there, and she's got these talons digging into the ground. And the sculptor who made her, she's actually leaning forward at you if you look at her from the side, an aggressive woman. Well, her story goes like this. She's on top of her mountain, her pyramid, in her temple, her home, sweeping, and all of a sudden this white ball of flowers falls from the sky. Not flowers, feathers falls from the sky. She takes those feathers, she sticks them in her skirt, and the next day she wakes up pregnant. Sort of an immaculate conception. And Coyolxauhqui, she's the dismembered woman that we saw before, looks at Mom and says, "Mom, what happened?" Well, she tells the story. "Mom, I'm so disappointed in you. You can't get pregnant like that. I've got to go talk to my brothers and sisters, the stars." So Coyolxauhqui goes out to the stars and talks to them, and they come back to kill Mom. And as Coyolxauhqui is coming up the mountain, the pyramid, the structure, Cihuatateos, serpent skirt, gives birth to a full-grown warrior with his Mesoamerican sword ready to go. And as Coyolxauhqui comes up, he chops her up into little pieces. And basically, when you look at the moon at night, going through its phases, it's the sun chopping it up in little pieces. And so this whole thing that was happening on the pyramids was was their creation story. Go ahead. Now we need to meet another protagonist, our Cihuatateos. There's about 5 or 6 of these beautiful ladies in the museum as you're walking back out. This is a well. Let me step back for a second. Go on to the next picture. Remember her. A Cihuatateos is a woman who dies in childbirth. Now, if you're in Mesoamerica and you want to, there's one way to advance in that social class and get to hobnob with the right people, and that's to be successful as a warrior. Now, if you're a woman, the one time you can be a warrior is when you're dying in childbirth. Okay? Not a very good situation to advance in social class. But if you were to advance in social class as a man, as a warrior, you could begin to wear the cotton clothing, begin to wear sandals, things like that. Go ahead. We're back in the marketplace. And we can see the blood on the temples, running down the temples that the Spanish wrote about, and a lot of activity going on in the marketplace, a lot of decadent activity. Let's look at the next one. What we have right here, this is a Diego Rivera mural in the National Museum, is we have a woman here who thinks she's absolutely beautiful, and all these men oogling around her right here. Notice her hair, half of it is up in a braid and half of it is long. She's a prostitute. And she's showing off for the men here. Now she's kind of an oxymoron. She's a prostitute for the noble class. She's wearing sandals. She's got on fine clothing. Her legs are tattooed. It's hard to see there, but she's even sharpened her teeth into points and painted them red. We have this man over here looking at her, holding on to his jade necklace. Now there's a piece of jade out here for sale too, and it's not cheap. Holding on to his jade necklace, and she's looking at him, but look at this guy, this Aztec, this Mexica warrior. What does he have in his hands that he's offering to her? He's offering a human arm, and what Diego Rivera is telling us here is this human arm is as valuable as that jade necklace in their culture. Now, when a woman dies in childbirth, the way Dr. Solis explained it is the family around the woman would arm themselves tooth and nail to protect her from the Aztec warriors, especially the young warriors who would converge upon her home to cut off her arms as a trophy of a legitimate warrior. Not a very pleasant culture to live in. Where do we have arms as trophies in the Book of Mormon? We have it with Ammon. Go ahead. Who is Ammon? Next one. Ammon's a missionary. He's there to serve the Lamanites. Next one. He's the son of King Mosiah. What does that make him? Ammon is a prince. Now, that means that Ammon, in Mesoamerican terms, is recognized as a prince. Does King Lamoni recognize Ammon as a prince? Straight away. How do we know that? Because he offers his daughter to marry him. You don't offer your daughter to the canoe maker or the pottery person in Mesoamerica. And Ammon does something that's unheard of, that would be worth recording in the annals of an ancient document in Mesoamerica. He says, no, I will be your servant. Next one. He's a leader. Ammon is the one who gets the group together to start the mission, and he's also one at the end who reflects with the others on how great this mission was. Now, go back one. Don't want to read that one quite yet. I forgot to tell you how you use a Mesoamerican sword a little bit. I implied it, but I forgot to tell you. The Aztecs would have these flower wars to go out and collect people to sacrifice. Because you can't, when you're sacrificing thousands of people, you got to go get your supply somewhere. That Mesoamerican sword could slice through a horse's head with one swing if used on the edge. But if turned on its side, you could hit somebody on the top of the head like a club and just knock them out. Or you could turn it a little bit and just cut them without being able to kill them. And these Aztec warriors were very skilled at using the sword the right way and the right time for their right situation. They could kill somebody, they could decapitate somebody, they could cut off an arm or a leg, or they could simply injure them enough to bring them back for a human sacrifice. Now let's go look at this next one. Alma 17:37. But behold, every man that lifted his club to smite Ammon, these were the bad Lamanites, he smote off their arms with his sword. For he did withstand their blows, go ahead, by smiting their arms, the next slide, with the edge of his sword. Insomuch they began to be astonished and began to flee before him. Yea, and they were not few in number, and he caused them to flee by the strength of his arm. Now the Book of Mormon is interesting that it distinguishes that here it was with the edge of his sword as opposed to what? Now in this book that I'm reading about the Chinese and the Japanese and the Americans, not once in all of these ugly kinds of scenarios that they paint do they ever talk about the edge of the sword. Because in our swordsmanship, we sometimes use the point, and I suppose you could use the edge, but that's if you're talking about a flat part as well. In the Book of Mormon, it distinguishes that this was done with the edge of the sword. Now, where else does Ammon use his swordsmanship? Well, let's wait for a second. There. Ammon cuts off, he kills 6 people with the sling, kills, I think, 1 more with the sword, then cuts off arms. How many? The record says it was not a few. And then he doesn't take it back as a trophy. The other people take it back. And King Lamoni is so impressed with Ammon that he says, this isn't a regular man. He's not a regular prince. I would have expected, this is me conjecturing, I would have expected a Mesoamerican prince to bring back 1 or 2 arms. But it's not a few. This must be the Great Spirit. Go ahead. Well, King Lamoni joins the church, so to speak, and decides to introduce Ammon to his father. And his father, King Lamoni's father, is very upset. So what does Ammon do? Oh, Let's look at Ammon here first. Go ahead. We're going to give him the Mesoamerican sword, the Makatle, that he can turn, he can use flat or on its edge. We're now going to give him, we won't go into this at all. Those are hard to see because they're so camouflaged. Those are Mesoamerican turkeys, wild turkeys. Just remember the Book of Mormon says flocks and not sheep. Let's go to the next one. The king stretched forth his hand to slay Ammon, but Ammon withstood his blows, and he also, go ahead, the next one, smote his arm that he could not use it. He could have cut off King Lamoni's father's arm, but instead he just smote it, the way a Mexica warrior might, to make it so he could not use it. And that was so significant that what did King Lamoni's father do? He basically said, you own me. You can have anything you want, including my kingdom. But again, Ammon didn't even take that. Is there anywhere else in the Book of Mormon where we see the smiting of arms? Yes. Go ahead. This is later. And the Lamanites did fight like dragons, and many of the Nephites were slain by their hands. Yea, for they did smite into many of the headplates. Hit the next one. And they did pierce many of the breastplates, and they did smite off many of their arms, and thus the Lamanites did smite in their fierce anger. We have the Lamanites cutting off arms. We have Ammon cutting off arms, and we have the Mexica, much later, still cutting off arms in Mesoamerica as part of a symbolic gesture in battle. Now, why does this story in the Book of Mormon? The Book of Mormon does a much better job of telling it in a meaningful way. There could be several reasons. One is the analogy of Ammon to Christ. But I'm going to end with these two scriptures right here. And this is the blessing which hath been bestowed upon us. This is Ammon talking to his brothers at the end of their mission. That we have been made instruments in the hands of God to bring about this great work. Ammon knew what it was like to be a Mesoamerican, and he knew what tactics or what strategies to use that God could enhance so that he could be impressive as a missionary. And Aaron says to Ammon, "Whoa, I'm afraid you're boasting, and you may sin in your boast." But Ammon responds, "Yea, I know that I am nothing. As to my strength I am weak. Therefore, I will not boast of myself, but I will boast of my God. For in his strength I can do all things." And I want to leave that with you, that we each have strengths that our Heavenly Father can use in us. And I'd like to say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.